Are you having issues getting it up on the Transbrake? Well, I might just be able to help you out with this video. And by getting up on the Transbrake, I mean with your turbo car, you're trying to spool the turbos to get up to the two-step, and also once you're actually on the two-step. So I see a lot of people having issues with this, and a lot of people don't really understand. And I figured I'd make this video to try and help those people out a little bit and show what's worked for me and my experience with my 4.8 liter with twin S366s. An easy way to understand it is you're going to have to act like the turbine wheel is your merry-go-round on your playground. So you're trying to accelerate that turbine wheel or merry-go-round. So your hand is going to be the exhaust. So your hand pushing on the merry-go-round is just like the exhaust pushing on that turbine wheel. So in order to accelerate that merry-go-round faster, you have a couple options. You can either push it more often and you can push it harder. So pushing it more often is going to be your engine RPM. You know, the higher RPM, the more exhaust pulses there's going to be hitting that turbine wheel. And harder is basically going to be your exhaust energy, which you can kind of affect that with your ignition timing. You can retard the ignition timing and make some more exhaust energy, make it hit that turbine wheel harder. And you can also add some fuel, and then it also depends on which fuel you use. For example, gasoline is not going to have as much energy as like E85, because E85 is going to take more fuel, and it's the same way with E85 from ethanol. So the more fuel is going to give it more exhaust energy and make it easier to spool. So if you change fuels, you might notice a difference, and I've even noticed a difference in my car and started having issues whenever I mixed in C16 with the 85 because it didn't have quite as much exhaust energy. It's a little bit different with an auto car from a clutch car. For example, you know, the clutch car, you don't have any load on the engine whenever that clutch is in, so you can just push the clutch in and floor it, and you only need enough power to get the engine to rev to whatever your two-step is, so you're not having to fight a converter or anything like that. So you can be you don't have to have the tune optimized really in that area with a clutch car, because it'll just get right up to the two-step, and then you can pull all your timing and add fuel or whatever you want to do and make pretty fireballs and pop and bang and build all your boost. But if you were to just have the timing too low whenever you're trying to get up on the converter and too much fuel, then the engine's not going to make enough power to get up to the two-step RPM, because you're killing all the power pulling timing and having it too rich or too lean or whatever else. So you kind of have to treat it differently whenever you have an auto car, and you have to make sure it has enough power to get it up onto the two-step and get the turbos moving. And then once you're on the two-step, if you want to, you can retard the timing sometimes or do different things like that to make it build faster once it actually gets to the two-step. But anyways, I'm going to show you some logs of mine and show you some changes I've made in order to make mine better, because the first time out with my car, it definitely was not spooling fast enough, and I'll show you what I figured out in order to fix that issue. So here we are. This is actually my first pass ever with my Fox body at the track. As you can see by the top, it was you know, a real fast start on my way to the sevens. I went an 11.1 at 95 miles per hour. But anyways, we're not going to be talking about the actual how fast I was going as much as the spool time right now. So I'll go down here. You'll see I have it marked right at where I get to 100% TPS, and you can see here is the ignition timing, and then the air-fuel ratio. That's in lambda right there, or down here is the actual and gasoline scale air-fuel ratio, if that's easier for you. I know that's what most people follow. So anyways, we'll see the time. So down here it shows just after 1 minute, 1 minute 0.6 on the time that I actually went wide open throttle. So we'll see how long it took me to get to the actual two-step. So we'll go across here, and you can see I have about 26 degrees of timing in it, and you can also see the air fuel is kind of a little bit all over the place, but it was alright at the lower boost levels. And then I kind of started getting about 3-4 pounds of boost. It started to get a little too rich in my opinion, the lower 11s, so that definitely hurt the spool time. And I also had the timing too low really for that boost level, so that kind of hurt it. And as you can see, it's taking quite a while to spool, and we got it finally right about there is where it starts to hit the two-step for the first time. So we'll see down here that's 107. So it took just about 6.5 seconds for me to get from wide open throttle to actually getting on the two-step for the first time. So that's definitely not going to work, especially with most races. They'll have a timeout. So once the other car is fully staged and you're pre-staged, you usually have about 7 seconds to get fully staged before you're timed out and you lose the race right there. So I would have it would have been hard to make it in with that long of a spool time right there. But now we'll go to later pass where I kind of had things a lot more figured out. This was actually my fastest pass with the stock ECU. I went 847 at 163 miles per hour. So we'll go back again to where I was at 100% TPS. That was 213.6, and the biggest thing you'll want to watch here is the timing. I had quite a bit more timing in it, and I think that makes the bigger difference than the air fuel ratio, but they both play a part of it. So see here, I start spooling, and I bumped the timing up. At this point I was up just over 30 degrees of timing, which sounds like a lot, but it's a little bit different on the Transbrake. The load is a little bit different, so in my experience they typically like being what most would consider overtimed on the Transbrake in order to get up to the two-step quicker. So that's what worked for me. And you'll notice the air fuel ratio, it's kind of low 12s, high 11s, and stays right around there. It starts getting a little bit richer as boost comes in, but it's not in the bottom 11s like the other pass was, where it took forever to spool. And just more timing all the way across the board. And we'll see, that's right about there is where I'm on the two-step. That's 217.4, so that's right around 4 seconds, just under. So that's much better. I took 2.5 seconds off of my spool time just from tune changes. This was the exact same combo. This was actually at the exact same track. The weather was probably a little bit different, but within 1,000-foot density altitude from each other. Both were probably 5,000 to 6,000 feet. That's just kind of what we have to deal with here in New Mexico a lot. But also another thing that has a big factor in it is the weather. So I'll go to another log here, or the density altitude more accurately. So this is this is after I went to the Holly. These are two different logs from the same. The tune was pretty much the same. It was just the biggest difference was where I was at with these. So the solid line, this was here in New Mexico at Roswell actually, and it was probably around 5,000 foot density altitude. And this other pass was actually my first stock bottom end record pass, where I went 791 at 170, and that was in Houston for Texas 2K, and it was negative 700 density altitude, which obviously that's a massive difference. And you can kind of see that over here with the barometric pressure. So here in New Mexico it was 90 kPa, and down in Houston it was 103 kPa. So that will make a huge difference. As you can see here, I had the tune roughly the same. We'll go across here. We'll see it's about 6 seconds roughly on the time of whenever I went wide open throttle. And we'll go over here on this pass in Houston. It bounced off the two-step about 3.5 seconds, so that's 2.5 seconds to get up to the two-step, whereas this other pass with the same tune, it took roughly 4 seconds, which is about the same as it was on the stock ECU. I had the tune about the same, but here we'll go across here and watch the ignition timing. See 30 degrees just like the other one. It still hasn't built any boost at this point. And here you can see the difference in the stall speed on the converter just from the weather. So as you can see here, it's both of them are just not making any boost quite yet, and both 30 degrees of timing. The air fuel is exactly the same, but you can see the RPM is 400 RPM higher on the pass that went with better density altitude. So that's just from the engine. The engine just makes that much more power at that in that air, that it can spool that much faster and flash the converter that much higher. So that's a big thing whenever you're speccing a converter also, or if you buy, you know, your 3500 stall and it doesn't stall to 3500 for you, it might be because of your density altitude. And that's a big thing with getting a converter, is you have to take into consideration how good or bad your air is in your altitude. But as you can see, you can follow the timing here. It's pretty aggressive down low, you know, 30 degrees of timing, and then I start to ramp the timing out once it starts to build some boost. And I didn't have an ignition retard really on the two-step in order to make it build more boost. And another thing that's different in between these passes is how much boost I was trying to make. I obviously was trying to leave on a little bit more boost whenever I was down in Houston, so I had more CO2 pressure on the wastegates, and that will help keep the wastegates closed, which will help it spool faster as well. So, but anyways, there's that. It gives you maybe an idea. You could kind of use this as a baseline. Another thing though, with obviously you're not going to want to be having, or I wouldn't think, you know, over 30 degrees of timing in your car, in your turbo car on like 91 octane pump gas. You kind of really need to have some good fuel in order to be that aggressive with it, in my opinion. But I don't really like to mess with pump gas. I kind of stick to E85 and C16 and stuff like that. But another big factor, which I'll show you with a log from a customer's car, sometimes even though it can be the converter or too big of turbos or too small of an engine causing issues, a lot of times it's the tune. But here is an example of actually, you know, the wrong parts causing issues with spool time. So the only difference between these two logs, the tune was exactly the same. It was not touched. The only thing that was changed was a cam. So if on the red log you see here, this was with a custom cam from someone that went way too aggressive on it, and it just would not, the car wouldn't spool at all. It took forever. As you can see here, it took roughly 10 seconds from wide open throttle to our target boost, which was 14 pounds of boost and 4,400 RPM two-step. This engine was it's a 427 with twin 80mm S400s from Jose at Forced Inductions, which are definitely big turbos, but 427, that's a big motor too, so you really shouldn't have that much trouble spooling it. So you can see he changed back to Little John Motorsports cam actually, and you can see the difference here. It was at 14 pounds of boost, you know, in roughly 6 seconds from this point, 3500, where that one started, because it was auto triggered by the ECU instead of started before on this other one. But you can see there's a just over 3 second difference in how fast it got to the same boost and same RPM with the exact same tune just by changing the cam. So anyways, I hope this helped you guys out a little bit. If you have any questions, feel free to ask them below and I'll try and get to them. Hopefully I kind of covered everything and made it a little bit easier to understand. So basically, in conclusion, you want to be pretty aggressive with the with the ignition timing, and not too rich or anything like that whenever you're trying to get up to that two-step RPM. But then once you get to the two-step, then you can kind of do things a little bit differently. You can then you can, you know, retard the ignition timing. That can make it build a little bit faster once it's already up there, or add some fuel or whatever else. You kind of just have to, you know, it's trial and error. Different setups are going to work differently. Another thing that I would like to mention, and kind of go back to that merry-go-round analogy is you can't just use one of those two methods, more pressure and more RPM. You have to use kind of both of them together. So here's an example from I was actually having some issues whenever I was trying to re-break my own record. I kept having issues getting it to 60 foot because as you can see here, the solid green line, the boost it would go up and drop and go up and drop, and it just wouldn't hold stable. And then I would launch, and of course every time it seemed like I would catch it on the low side and leave on not enough boost, and then it would spool. It would take longer to spool once it was actually on the pass, and it just wouldn't have as much power off the hit. So I wouldn't be able to 60 foot as well as I needed to. I really needed to go a mid 1-teen 60 foot, and I kept dropping like that, and all I could do was like a mid to low 1-2 60 foot, and that wasn't going to be enough to re-break my record. So basically the issue that I was running into, as you can see, I was retarding the ignition timing, and I was trying to use that to build more boost, which it does work. And you can see here kind of whenever I start to retard the ignition timing, it definitely starts building more boost, but then it is unstable, and it took me a while to figure out why it was doing that. But what I ended up figuring out, as you can see by this other pass where I didn't actually pull any timing, it was because I didn't have enough RPM on the two-step. So it's kind of goes the same way with that merry-go-round. If you push it really hard but you're not pushing it often enough, it's going to gain speed and then lose speed, and gain speed and lose speed. So that's what I was doing to the turbos right there, and that's why it was raising and it was jumping up and down in boost, because it would get hit hard with exhaust pressure, but it wasn't getting hit often enough to keep it spinning the same speed. So it would gain speed and lose speed, and gain boost and lose boost, and then I would not have stable boost, and either I would leave on let's see, I'd either leave on 16 pounds or sometimes even down to like 10 pounds, or 12 pounds on this one. So whereas this other log, whenever I raised the RPM up, I was able to hold a steady 16 pounds of boost as long as I wanted to sit on the Transbrake or on the two-step, and I was able to leave exactly on the boost that I wanted to and get the 60 foot that I needed. And I actually went a 115 60 foot on that pass, whereas this other pass I went like a 121, I believe. So that's another thing to consider. You kind of have to use the RPM and the ignition retard if you're going to use that together. You can't kind of just use one or the other, but it also depends on your engine size. Obviously this is a little 4.8, and it needs quite a bit to spool the bigger turbos. I didn't run into this issue originally because I was originally just running straight E85, which, like I mentioned, the E85 is going to have a little bit more exhaust energy than something like a C16. And whenever I started running into this issue, I had actually moved to 50% E85 and 50% C16 because I was maxing out my fuel pumps. So that that gave me a little bit less exhaust energy because of the less fuel, and that's why I was having that issue all of a sudden. So I just had to raise the RPM a little bit, and that fixed it and let me set that record. But anyways, as you can see, I kind of blocked out the timing on how low it goes once I'm actually on the pass. We'll show you that at 1,000 subscribers, actually on the first record pass. But also at 600 subscribers, I plan on going back over all of the data logs from my first track outing and showing that, just to kind of see where I started. As you can see, I definitely did not start out very fast, and it was a learning experience on getting to that 7-second range. But I plan on taking you guys through that and telling you how I did it, and giving you guys the information to where maybe you can do it yourself if you want to, or at least you know how we do it. So anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed the video. Make sure to like, subscribe, and share with your friends, and let's get up to that 600 subscriber and 1,000 subscriber mark so I can show you guys some more data. Thank you.